Chicago, a judge is hearing arguments about hearsay in the Drew Peterson case. Now, the former police sergeant was first a suspect in his fourth wife's disappearance, and later he was charged with the murder in the death of his third wife, Kathleen. The witnesses say she was afraid Peterson would kill her, and those witnesses are expected to speak at today's hearing. The judge has to decide whether to admit those statements as evidence. Beth Karras joins us now from New York to talk about how this evidence could affect the case. And Beth, let me ask you, how many witnesses do they expect to actually see in this hearing?
Well, the witness list reportedly has about 60 names on it. It doesn't mean that all of them will be called, but there will be a number of witnesses, and this hearing is expected to last at least 2 weeks, maybe as long as 4 weeks.
All right, and what's happening right now? This is called Drew's Law. Is this law named after Drew Peterson? And how does this law play out?
Well, you know, the state attorney for Will County, which is where this case is, actually assisted in the drafting of this law in 2008. It was effective in December 2008, and Drew Peterson was charged with the murder 5 months later. Now, the state attorney, would deny that it was drafted with Drew Peterson in mind, and I'm sure the legislator behind it would deny it as well. It's the media that has really dubbed it Drew's Law. But if you look at the circumstantial evidence that he was a suspect in the murder of his third wife, if you believe the second and third autopsies done, calling it a homicide, not an accident. But he wasn't charged until this law went into effect. And there are a lot of statements that the prosecution wants to use that arguably come in under this law if the prosecution can pass muster at this hearing. So it all seems to point to Drew Peterson being the impetus behind the enacting of this law. However, the prosecution would argue that he was not.
And do some of those statements that they're trying to admit, are they statements from Stacey Peterson?
Yes, there are statements, Ryan, from both of these wives, third wife, dead wife, and the fourth wife missing, some people believe dead, not sure what happened to her. In order for these statements to come in, the judge has to be satisfied that the prosecutor proved not only that these statements of these missing and dead women are reliable, and there's got to be some indicia of reliability for any kind of hearsay that comes in, but an element or a criterion that the judge has to consider is that Drew Peterson murdered each of them, and that he murdered each of them wanting to prevent them from testifying in some kind of proceeding. For Savio, the third wife, it would have been a divorce hearing, which was coming up in about 5 weeks or so, or less, before she died, after she died, rather. It was in April. She died on February 29th, March 1st, 2004. And for Stacey Peterson, the argument would be that he murdered her to prevent her from testifying at the murder trial of Kathleen Savio. But these are things the prosecution has to show at this hearing to the judge's satisfaction by a preponderance of the evidence.
Wow. And, you know, when you think about this, what does this mean for other cases that might come forward in Kansas and all over the country in terms of hearsay?
You know, this law has a lot of defense lawyers very concerned in the state of Illinois. It doesn't go beyond Illinois. But it is a law that the legislature drafted to get around U.S. Supreme Court rulings that go back to a case called Crawford and California v. Giles, which say you cannot introduce testimonial hearsay statements, that is, statements made with a view toward being used at some sort of a trial or a hearing, and one could argue that statements to a police officer, to a prosecutor, he's going to kill me, I'm afraid he's going to kill me, could be used. You know they could be used against Peterson or whomever in the future. Well, the Supreme Court has said you can't use these statements unless that person is up there being cross-examined. It violates the Sixth Amendment right of confrontation. This law gets around that. So the constitutionality of the law is going to go up, and it's going to get challenged in Illinois. Maybe it'll make its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So the Drew Peterson case, if he gets convicted, it's going to be around for a long time.